throughout my entire pregnancy, I prepared in every way possible. I just truly never pictured myself in a NICU. I never pictured myself with a baby in a helicopter being life flighted. I never pictured so many of those moments, and I think nobody ever does. I mean, anytime you ever meet a mom that's going through that storm, you'll never hear her say that she saw it coming.
I think Oliver's story began for us with a wonderful expectation and, excitement. And it began during, obviously, the pregnancy for Oliver was a ridiculously busy, fast sprinting season of life because we had Addison, we had our 1-year-old, and we had our, baby number one. And shortly after baby number one, as we sometimes will look at it, was the practice and starting PWC and taking care of families in that way. So it was just so busy. It was the blessing of being busy. And then we had Addison's pregnancy, Addison's labor and delivery. Addison's whole entire first year plus there of health was so magical and so beautiful and so perfect. There was no perfect storm elements to it. That I think in simple terms, the expectation I had with Oliver was, round 2, and it would just be easy. Yeah, I think honestly, preparation is a word we love. It's a word you love. And so, I don't know of anybody who was more prepared for a natural birth and a beautiful, healthy baby and all the desired positive outcomes whatsoever. I mean, I remember the birth plan being multiple pages, right? And it was my job to print that sucker off and bring it along and have the midwife and have the doula and have the team all prepared and be your best friend and be your advocate. And so I would say we were as prepared as could be with zero preparation for what actually happened. Just pure shock. If I remember the beginning after his traumatic birth, I just remember honestly, I remember the drive. They took him from the helicopter from the first hospital. They took him in a helicopter to the second hospital. I remember fighting hard at first to want to be on the helicopter. Because I had been in the ambulance that got him there to that first one, and I just wanted to adjust him, and I just wanted to protect him, and I just wanted to have my hands on him, and I just wanted to be connected to him. And so I remember wanting to be in the helicopter and was not allowed in the helicopter. And I wasn't with you during this conversation with Oliver. He was in a room, you were in the waiting room, and I was fighting hard to get into the helicopter. And that was when he had his first seizure and the blood coming out of his nose from the hypoxic injury and the brain injury and the oxygen issues.
When Oliver was first born, he came out and he was completely blue, but we just thought he just needs to take his first breath. We never thought it would cascade into what it did. And we, right away, Tony flipped him.
He was not just blue, he was
lifeless.
And so there was no sound, no movement, no breathing, no nothing. His birth was crazy fast. That was Oliver's birth. He was delivered, shot out like a rocket on Memorial Day of 2009. And so he shot out like a rocket and landed on the bed. Because he went so fast, the medical team was just not ready for that quick of a delivery from you. And I literally watched him land on the bed, head and neck flexed. So brainstem, cervical injury, everything I had studied, but just knew, and he wasn't breathing, full blue, full cyanotic. So I remember Deb helping me get you turned around, umbilical cord still attached, and I made his first adjustment to just make something start. And it did.
And it did. Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah. His first breath.
It was tiny and it was little and he kicked out just a little bit of fluid and he took his little first breath.
Yeah.
And then he had you and then we tried to get him to rebuild. We tried to get him to latch and tried to get him with you and knowing that you would be his source of strength and that.
Yeah.
And he started going.
One of the things I remember most is that he sounded like he was drowning. When he initially took that first breath, you could tell that he just wasn't really getting air, and it sounded like he was drowning. And that's one of the sounds I look back on, and I get so mad at myself that I didn't know. That I didn't know that he needed more, that he wasn't okay. The thing that is so different in Oliver's story is that he had chiropractic from that very first moment. And that's truly the only thing that sets his story apart from every family that we met in the NICU. Every baby that was in the NICU, every baby that was in the pods, the only thing that Oliver had that set him apart. Because I bet all those other moms took great care of themselves during pregnancy, thought they did everything right, envisioned this beautiful start to creating a life and, adding to their family. The only difference we had in Oliver's story is we had chiropractic from the start.
And so my favorite part for us, for Oliver, is that he had chiropractic, and it absolutely was the singular, clearest, easy for me to explain scientifically difference point that he had to have the outcome that he does, which is so full of life. But the hardest part of that is we knew the whole time it injured his nervous system. You could put it in whatever anatomical term you want. They all come together. He injured his neck. He injured his brainstem. He had a hypoxic injury, so lack of oxygen to his brain. He had CSF flow issues, so his brain suffered brain damage. Our word within that is subluxation, but he suffered right in front of us the thing that I had spent the last 2 years studying every single day. He suffered a brain damage, perfect storm, traumatic birth. I just knew that we could fix that. And so the whole time it was like we were running down these 2 tracks every day in that hospital, praying and trusting that the medical team would fix the issues they needed to fix with his pulmonary hypertension, with his heart-lung challenges, and they did, with the most amazing surgeries and the most amazing medications. And every single day, he got adjusted multiple times per day. Eventually, we did come together and we said, let's get out of here. We have to get him out of here. I remember pictures of child after child and story after story. And the stories all were of kids with severe disabilities and challenges. And they were beautiful stories of parents embracing the challenge, embracing what they went through, and making life the best with it. But then from that, we just went to work. We just adjusted him every day, and you loved him every day. And then we got out of there.
Yeah.
So at first, he was at a hospital, which was a level 3 NICU, but not as equipped as where he would end up on his 3rd day of life at Lutheran General. And he was the sickest baby in both of those hospitals, and those were the words that they would use to us. So he had persistent pulmonary hypertension, so PPHN. The first hospital, in order to try and, knowing that there was oxygenation challenges from the birth, to try and prevent brain damage, there was all brand new research. It wasn't really well researched at all. It was just kind of this new method. They did whole body cooling. So for the first couple of days of his life, one of the hardest things we had to deal with was our baby was just there in the isolette, freezing cold. And so they kept his body temperature cold, which was a huge contraindication.
While in a medically induced coma.
And having pulmonary hypertension. Because when you're cold, you constrict. So the number one thing he needed for life-sustaining, basic functions with heart and lungs, was to open up. Because his birth was so fast, he didn't have that first kickstart, and those things weren't working. And so, as simple as that sounds, that's what he needed first. And so, because they couldn't get it working on his own, they transferred him via ambulance to Lutheran General here in Chicago, and on the ambulance ride, so they scheduled him for ECMO, extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, heart-lung bypass surgery. And on the ambulance ride, because he had to warm up for the surgery, they couldn't do the surgery cold. He got so much better so fast, they almost didn't do ECMO because his body started to respond and his own healing mechanism started to kick in. But ultimately, they still decided he had so much challenge that they needed to do ECMO. So a team of surgeons and doctors and machines, one of the most amazing things you'll ever see, because God gave us that too, did that for 5.5 days, I think he was on ECMO. They expected him to be 10 to 12 days. They prepared us for 2 full weeks of this ECMO, and he surprised the heck out of all of them and was out of there in 5.5 days.
Yeah. And I don't think there's ever, like, the moment when you're waiting for a surgeon to come in and tell you what happened during that surgery, I don't think there's ever a moment of relief that, unless you've experienced it, to know what that feels like.
It went very well.
And just the incredible talent that God has given people to gift them to, I mean, in a tiny infant's neck, to pump out his blood, put oxygen into it, and pump it back into him. It's just, we're so incredibly thankful for that side of it. And I think that's where parents struggle so much in this medical world, is you have people that have saved your child's life, and then you have a difference of opinion from them. And I think that's where the biggest struggle comes from, is you're so grateful. Without them, your child would not be alive.
And to his prognosis, that was, I'd say, the stuff with the PPHN and ECMO and all these medical terms that have to do with his heart and his lung trouble, that was not my biggest concern. I knew, you could look up and you could see, holy cow, God has made these amazing surgeries and machines and doctors who can put these fires out and help that stuff. But because his brain damage was so much, both before ECMO, during ECMO, he had multiple EEGs, so brain scans and MRIs as well. And they both clearly showed severe, there's no other word for it, severe brain damage and burst suppression. So he had tons of damage on multiple areas of damage that could be seen on MRI. And then he had a burst suppression on his EEG, which I can picture the exact place I was when I started to read that research that night after we got that first EEG report. And burst suppression, the level he had and the cause of his being that physical birth trauma, he had only a 20% chance of living past age 1. And what they told us was, if he makes it to 1 and beyond, it's a 99%. And they were only saying that because it would have just sounded inhuman to say 100%, which is what they meant. 99% chance of cerebral palsy, epilepsy, autism. What actually ended up happening, though, through the burst suppression, through the EEGs, and through the terrible neurological prognosis he faced medically, according to their interpretations of how this works, it actually was our window into getting through and getting out, because then we sought out second opinions from different epileptologists and neurologists who I had already made partnerships and started to do collaborative work with, which is what the world needs, is not medicine or neurologically focused chiropractic, but medicine and neurologically focused chiropractic, in whatever order that comes in for your family. We need both, one for emergencies and one for health restoration, which is what Oliver needed. So that path they kind of put us on set us to where we needed to be, to work with what I knew from a neurologically focused brain-based chiropractic concepts, to talk with Dr. Rossi and with Dr. Michael Smith and Nancy Monica and say, do you guys think the body could heal from the inside out if we get this stress off his body and we activate his vagus nerve? What's his chiropractic prognosis? And that's where Dr. Cody surrounded us. So many people in our circle really came in and supported me from the chiropractic side and said, if you already are getting 17-year-old, 18-year-old, 19-year-old kids better in the clinic who have epilepsy and autism and had a traumatic birth, if their brains heal 19 years later, why would Oliver's 9 days old not be capable of the most amount of healing you've ever seen? And so that became the plan, and then that became his outcome. He left the hospital on the dot at 6 weeks. I remember it was so he was born on Memorial Day, and he came home on 4th of July weekend, because I remember the fireworks and it was our anniversary, or the day before. So he came home and we did all that, and I specifically remember for his case just how important it was to do exactly that, just be done with it. But when he left the NICU, his EEG became perfectly clear. So his last EEG in the hospital was clear. All the burst suppression was gone. All the seizure activity was gone. And his MRI was completely clear. His EKGs had gotten much better. We had to do a follow-up with that at 6 and 12 months. Yeah. And so one thing he battled with,
his digestion and everything came back online without doing any of the medications.
One thing that was Oliver's battle, his one remaining battle, his first 2-3 years of life, was croup. because he had such a tough start with his lungs. Like if we'd have followed the medical path and you fought, you nursed, we'd adjust, you would nurse, I would adjust, you would nurse, I would adjust. Had we stayed in the medical system, he would have had more of that. And then he would have had antibiotics, and then he would have had steroids, and we would have taken an already, kind of tough to get off the ground and get going immune system and respiratory system, and we would have squashed it further, which is what medicine does. And he'd be asthmatic, and he'd be allergies, and he'd be the chronically sick kiddo, and he is anything but. He is recently turned 14 years old and runs a 5.5 minute mile and literally runs 4 or 5 miles every single day, shoots hundreds of baskets. He's 5'10", he's jacked. He's got 3 sisters he's the nicest, kindest, humblest, helpful kid in the world. And every part of his life is really just what God has planned for our kiddos, which is he's living.
I remember when he was actually in the hospital, and one of my friends that I met through a birthing class told me, thank God who his dad is. And I remember at the time being upset because I was like, why would you say that's a good thing? Like, why would you say that just because Tony's a chiropractor? But it wasn't until the hindsight and looking back on it that I know absolutely Oliver's story is our true north and the true north of pediatric chiropractic, because we have seen that miracle with our own eyes. And through his miracle, we've seen so many other miracles where there are times that I think to myself still, can it be chiropractic? I still think that to myself, and I still wonder about it. And then God will place another miracle right in front of me and just continues to say, yes, it is. It really is. It is. And I think it's such a great thing looking back on and seeing the only difference in Oliver's story was chiropractic. His story was even worse than a lot of those babies that were in pods. His EEG was worse than a lot of those babies in the pods, and his health right now is 100%. And the only thing that Oliver had was chiropractic. And I just remember when, we'd be sitting in there and we would just be praying and begging, honestly, there's no other word other than begging for his life and for him to be saved, and just thinking of what would we owe if we could have Oliver? What would we owe if God saved him? And I know it doesn't work that way, but I think to that time all the time. And with everything we have, we want to give back to every parent that feels hopeless in that situation and in that moment, and give them the one thing that Oliver had that we know got him to where he is at now. And just every parent deserves that, to know that they have that option, to know that they can ask questions, to know that pediatric chiropractic exists, because we're still living in a time where most people don't know that pediatric chiropractic exists and how it can help. And I just think of, if my son had that as the only difference that gives him the life that he has now, it is time to change that and time to bring it out into the world, so you have a choice.
When we get tired, Oliver's like that recharging station, and you just look at him and you get it used to be a long hug, now it's a bro hug with Oliver too, because he's my bro. And it's all you need. It's all you need to go find that next mom, to go write that next article, to go deal hope to that next mom on a consultation by listening first, empowering second, and then explaining and saying, hey, this is what we can do. This is how this works to get your child out of the storm. There is an absolute network of pediatric chiropractors called the PX Docs Network, which is now God has assembled alongside of us. What I do know that wasn't there when Oliver was born is there's just more of us. There's more of us who are called to it, who are ready for it, who are trained for it. And I'm so glad there's more PX docs than ever before. We built an army of chiropractors who care enough to go into that storm with you and put our arm around you and guide you through it, guide you out of it through education, through empowerment, and through adjustments. And if I hadn't had that education, that empowerment, that it works from my mentors, that had me ready for Oliver's outcome isn't this. So I just ended up being his chiropractor, and so what you got to do here at Moms and Dads is you got to find your your chiropractor for your kiddo, and your chiropractor is a hope dealer. Your chiropractor is as scientifically nerdy as it can possibly get. You don't even know, especially if they're in our network. And you need to just know how much they care. You need to know exactly the science and the awesomeness behind what the adjustment and adjustments do. And that practice too, they'll build a community around you, and they'll support you in every step of the way. And what'll blow your mind, as it did with ours with Oliver, it just works. The number one way that Oliver impacted me for sure in becoming a just full out force for pediatric chiropractic is just trusting the process of how healing happens. So the way God designed us is the nervous system is the boss. The nervous system controls and coordinates everything. So whether it is the respiratory and cardiac system, or it's the brain, or it's the gut, or it's the immune system, you can't get any of that back online and better until you get the nervous system online first. So what it's done for us is it's really focused us on this profession. Neurologically focused chiropractors, we fix, restore, repair one thing, and it's the most important thing that sets up success of everything else. So that's really just that neuro-focused chiropractic. Everything needs to start there, no matter a child's condition, because that's where health really originates from.
When Oliver came home from the hospital, he was in early intervention, and I'll never forget that the first time, because I think it was a few weeks from the time he came home before early intervention came, and they looked at his paperwork obviously before his home visit, and when they met Oliver, they didn't believe it was Oliver, and they asked us all of these different questions on his paperwork because they were expecting to see a completely different baby, struggling a lot more than he was struggling. And we didn't do anything other than continue just adjusting, baby wearing him, loving him, and fully believing in that hope of what his life was going to look like instead of believing what they told us his life was going to look like. The number one thing that I have learned throughout this whole process is that I am their mom, and I am the one that is responsible for all decisions when it comes to my children. And I know more than I think I know. I think that's the hardest thing as parents, is we think that somebody is smarter than us, a doctor knows more than us, somebody knows bigger words than us, so they must know what's better for our kids than us. And that's not true. We know what is best for our kids because we are their mom. God selected us to be their mom, to protect them, to know what is best for them. And it took a really long, hard journey for me to believe in that power of being their mom. But it is by far the biggest thing that has carried me through what we went through with Oliver and so many things beyond in life, is that we are their mom. I'm Kristina Ebel.
And I'm Dr. Tony Ebel.
And we will make it through the storm.